Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 22nd of August and this is the Full Scottish. I'm Andrew Wilson and I'm delighted to be presenting our programme today from our studios in Cowcaddens. Firstly, we'll have a quick look at today's coronavirus update, then I will introduce our two guests, and then we will discuss the leading stories and the leading news of the past week. With regard to the coronavirus, there are 3,464 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. And I'm afraid to say that there have been 3 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. And I should say this is the status as at 2 p.m. on yesterday, Saturday the 21st of August. 4,075,555 people have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,541,708 have received their second dose. 320 people were in hospital with recently confirmed COVID-19 cases, 32 of whom were in intensive care. Since the start of the pandemic, a total of 380,215 people in Scotland have tested positive for COVID-19, and I'm afraid to say that 8,070 patients who had tested positive have sadly died. Now, having given you a brief coronavirus update, I would like to say that we are joined by 2 eminent guests today, and I'd like to introduce them both to you. Firstly, we're joined today by Alison Thewliss MP. Alison has been the MP for Glasgow Central since May 2015, having been a councillor in the Calton before that. How are you today, Alison?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, and I'm very grateful to you for joining us. And secondly, we're joined today by Simon Pia. Simon has been a journalist and writer, he tells me, for 40 years. He was a media specialist and advisor to the Labour Party and is now a lecturer at Edinburgh's Napier University. He also wrote the history of Wester Hailes. Simon, how are you keeping this afternoon?
Good. Glad to be back in Broadcasting Scotland.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. It's a pleasure to have you both today, and thank you for joining us. As you would expect, we'll start the discussion and start the programme today by looking at the current situation in Afghanistan. But before we discuss that in detail, there are a couple of quick updates following our Scotland at 7 programme on Friday. Firstly, the artist Fatima Hosseini, who was mentioned on the programme by our guest Ika Ferrer-Gotic, and who was at the time trapped in Kabul. Fatima has been evacuated, I understand, and is now safe and well in Paris, and that's great news. And also to mention that we're seeing activists and others in Scotland begin to get into their stride with fundraising and practical assistance for those affected, and that includes, for example, Eastwood Refugee Aid's crowdfunder, which passed £500 in more than 24 hours, and on which I'm sure we'll have more press coverage later this week. Our friend Chris McCusker and all the other activists are doing great work at that group and at all the others who are focused on raising funds and taking practical steps to help Afghans both in Afghanistan and in Scotland. Now, having shared those 2 positive pieces of news, we should return to the latest situation in Afghanistan. Tony Blair has been writing and Gordon Brown has been speaking this morning about the primacy of politics over strategy in the apparent decisions to withdraw and the manner of that withdrawal. So, Alison, first of all, what do you think about the assertions from former Labour politicians that there's no strategy now and it's all just simply politics?
Well, I think they're probably right to that extent, and we are seeing a real failure here on a number of different levels. The US pulling out in the way that they've done, the UK seemingly only able to carry on in response to what the US has done rather than doing anything independently or with allies within NATO. And we're seeing a failure to plan for this evacuation as well. So you have the scenario now where people can't get into Kabul airport to be evacuated. The hotel that the British government are using to process applications apparently absolutely chock full of people, and people not able to get there and get in because of the roadblocks the Taliban have now set up on the way to those places. And a real fear amongst people who are trying to do the evacuations now that they're not going to be able to do it by the deadline that has been agreed with the Taliban. So a whole number of failings here, but a failure to plan really for this at first, and a failure of cooperation and of international politics, I would say as well.
Oh, and Alison, I should also ask, as a constituency MP, what are you hearing through your constituency surgeries from those who are affected by the events in Afghanistan?
I have had a steady stream of people on the phone, by email, messaging me, and at my surgery on Friday. I've never seen anything like this. People so terribly afraid for their families, for their relatives, and they don't know what to do because the UK government's refugee scheme that they've talked about is not yet in place, that nobody knows exactly how that's going to operate. So we're all of us as MPs doing the best that we can to gather the information from people to make sure that that is put in front of the UK government so that they are at least aware of the people that we're trying to help. But it is very, very difficult and stressful and heartbreaking for relatives who don't know what's going to become of their loved ones, and very, very difficult indeed. And I would say also, just for the interest of people, that some of this is a clear, direct line from the Tory government's hostile environment to where we are now. And a number of people who've been in touch whose wives, whose children are in Afghanistan just now, the reason that they're not here in the UK is because the hostile environment means that you have to have earnings over a certain level to bring your family over. And despite working as hard as they are, they can't make those levels. So people have had visas refused, have had issues with bringing their family over because of the way that the system's set up right now. And that's hugely frustrating to know that they could be here, they could be safe, if it were not for arbitrary limits on people's household incomes that the Tories have brought in over all these years.
Thanks, Alison, and that's a good point that you make about the ongoing impact of the hostile environment, both in real practical terms on the ground and also in terms of the broader perspective and the broader approach that Westminster seems to be taking to these circumstances and to the lives of people and who are caught up. Simon, turning to you now, there's an argument that for 2 decades the UK's national leaders pretended to themselves as much as to everyone else that they were enacting a national strategy for Afghanistan, when in reality they were operating little more than the UK's tactics within an American strategy, over which they had little or no influence. Simon, what do you think the UK's role in Afghanistan has really been?
Very little. It was just basically there to back up the Americans, going back to 2001. It should also be remembered, in 2001, there was general, quite widespread support for going into Afghanistan. Although I was against it, I thought I was wrong at the time. I remember working as a journalist speaking to ex-military who said it was a big mistake. But the general media consensus and the public as well, by the time it got to Iraq, that had changed quite a bit. But it was quite galling for me to look at the papers this morning and see Tony Blair describing Biden as imbecilic. I think Tony Blair should have kept right out of this. You know, I think he's got nothing to offer. It was galling for me to see Alistair Campbell on Twitter last week, social media joining in and sniping away. It's been galling to see Labour politicians point scoring in a party political fashion against the government. We know it's a hopeless government, probably the worst government in living memory. But it was Labour that took us into Afghanistan, and we shouldn't forget that. And it's a time for us. It's over now. Britain's out. Britain's got nothing to do with us. All we've got to do is step up and take in a fair share of refugees. And I was looking at a league table during the week, and the US and the UK are way down the bottom behind about another dozen, I think, NATO countries, which is quite shameful. So we'll wait to see how many people in Britain. But there's been so many platitudes in the media and from politicians this week. Now, what the future of Afghanistan relies on, and we don't want, massacres, some horror show, the treatment of women, etc. It is a regional solution. Now, it's Pakistan, it's Iran, it's Russia, it's China. They have more influence on the Taliban now, Qatar as well, some of the Arab states, and trying to restrain so the Taliban don't revert to the regime before the invasion. But it should also been born in, I mean, we've got to look back and realise what a mistake it was. And this idea that Britain can go about doing, the British state can go about behaving in this way. Now, the public realise that. I think that Westminster is out of touch with the public. I think Americans agree with Biden, basically. I mean, it's the sad fact of the matter. But that's where we're at the moment. And it is for the West to keep out of these countries. And for people to speak about this, the Taliban, and we all know their record, and our media highlights the horror, the terror they've incurred upon the country in the past. But let's not forget the damage that we have done, the amount of people who've been killed due to the UK and US and NATO. It's also exposed how NATO is basically finished. It doesn't operate anymore as a properly united body. It was a cold war, a relic of the Cold War. So I think the only thing we should really focus on now is taking in as many refugees as we can.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. Alison, reflecting on what we've been discussing, do you think are the UK political leaders, indeed UK voters, are they kidding themselves that if they think that the UK is anything other than a bag carrier now for whatever the American foreign policy of the day is?
Well, I think Theresa May, actually, not a person I would naturally agree with on anything, put it very well in the debate, and she said, well, where is global Britain on the streets of Kabul? What does it actually mean now, if it ever meant anything at all, other than another vacuous slogan? And they really have, the UK government really have to decide what it is that they want in the world now, having isolated themselves from the EU, having clearly been dinged by America on this latest situation in Afghanistan. What is Britain for now in the world, and what role does it play? And I think, as Simon was saying, the very least that we can do in this scenario is try and take in the refugees and try and put something right, at least for some of the people whose world we have intervened in and disrupted in this way. And the UK government, in proposing 5,000 this year, 20,000 over an unspecified period of time, are really not doing nearly enough. People need assistance now. They don't need it in 5 years' time, they need it now to get out and get to safety and to be with their families here in the UK. And I would call in as well for the Home Office, who currently have 3,117 people of Afghans on their books just now who are waiting for a decision. Make a decision on those people, grant them leave to be here, allow them to have that peace of mind to know that they're not going to be returned to a war zone. 2,456 of those people have been waiting more than 6 months for a decision. And that's just unacceptable, particularly given how worrying things are and how the Home Office is operated. So I think at the very least, the UK should be showing compassion. It should be bringing refugees in greater numbers than they have proposed, and more urgently than they have proposed, to try and put some of this right. Because at the moment, it just feels as though there's nothing that they're doing that's helping.
And taking a step back for a moment, why do you think the Westminster government seems so determined to magnify the misery of those who are currently in Afghanistan, to magnify the misery of those 3,117 people who are waiting for a decision in the UK? Stepping back for a minute, what do you think is at the root of that approach and that attitude to people?
I mean, a lot of it is that kind of very political philosophy about a hostile environment, about making this country an unwelcoming place to come. And that is not what I get from constituents. They don't want that kind of hostile environment. I've been overwhelmed with the number of emails from constituents who said, please bring people in, please let people be safe. And that's reflected in demonstrations and in other things that we've seen on the media too. And I don't think the UK government are in step with how people in Scotland and Glasgow feel about this, because we're looking at this and people that we know and friends and relatives, and even just watching on TV screens those scenes of babies being handed over fences to troops to try and keep them safe. We can do something here. We can allow people that safety, that sanctuary, and the UK government must just ditch this philosophy of making this country unwelcoming, of suspicion and of undermining our international commitments through the Refugee Convention, and they should step up. Now is the time to do that.
Thanks, Alison. And Simon, is there a broader lesson here for the UK and for the people of Scotland, perhaps? The UK cannot influence American foreign policy, and certainly cannot influence, after Brexit, can't influence any EU policy of any sort. The UK will perhaps be more than ever incapable of influencing the world around us, and will simply have to react. Do you think there are any lessons there for us?
I think the lessons are looking forward. Possibly what you might have in the next decade is an independent Scotland and a united Ireland. That's a strong possibility. I would say in the next 20, 30 years, no Scottish troops, and probably England, I'm looking forward to an independent Scotland era now, would have gone to Afghanistan. And what you would have as well, if these are how the political currents are moving, Ireland and Scotland, the attitude of Irish and Scottish governments, I think would have quite an impact and influence upon what would be the English government. So it would be a recognition that the era of the post-imperial Britain is finished. It's gone forever. And I think this is quite, historians will look back on this week or the week just past as quite a key moment in that. And we've seen how Boris Johnson's government, they're even more sort of a puppet of the US government because of Brexit and cutting itself. But what people should be really looking forward for is, say, independent Scottish and Irish, or whatever becomes of England, are closer ties within Europe. And instead of NATO, you're looking for a European defence force of some sort. I know that people in the UK and people in the media and the right, political right, the idea of a European army, but I think there's possibilities for some humanitarian forces. But, I'd hold back. People should realise the West, that time in history now is over. The idea of humanitarian intervention is deeply flawed. I will acknowledge it worked in Kosovo. I would say there was a case that worked in Kosovo. You could say Sierra Leone. But if you look at the Middle East, and you look at the impact of British policy from Sykes-Picot going back to the creation of the State of Israel, right across Iraq, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, India, Pakistan. I mean, it's a terrible record. And now we're in a moment, with Black Lives Matter and people looking at these statues we have all around our cities. The generations coming through are going to have a completely different view about the British Empire and Britain's role in the world. And where older people, are still haven't woken up to that fact yet. But within 10, 20 years, I think there'll be a very different outlook from these isles about its role in the world.
Thanks, Simon. We'll switch our perspective, and we'll move from looking towards the east, and we'll look west for our next story, and that is the unfolding natural disaster on the island of Haiti. The UN estimates that I've read this morning estimate that 2,200 people have lost their lives, and there are still 400 missing after an earthquake that registered 7.2 on the Richter scale. The UK government's response has been to offer £1 million and to divert the Royal Fleet Auxiliary that operates in the Caribbean, and that vessel will be used as a helipad for US military helicopters. So, Alison, first of all, what is it that you would like to see the UK government doing in response to the events in Haiti?
But I think what you've outlined there about the aid and the fleet support is a start, is useful. I'm aware that British search and rescue teams have also gone there to try and get people out. But I think it's very difficult at the moment to see how that aid even reaches the people that need it the most. I've heard that it's difficult to get that aid in, and it's difficult to make that difference. And I think there needs to be a coordinated global effort when these types of situations occur, in order to have that kind of super swift reaction to help and to support people, whatever that is. Because These natural disasters do happen quite regularly, unfortunately, in various parts around the world. And I think coordinating a global effort to respond to that in a more kind of comprehensive way, rather than an ad hoc, here's an emergency, we're going to do this in each separate occasion, I think might be a more useful way to approach that.
Thanks, Alison. And Simon, I checked this morning, looking at the BBC News mobile page before we started this programme, and it reflected that there is almost no sign in the UK media of any coverage of any significance of the events that are unfolding in Haiti. Why do you think there is that almost complete absence of coverage of the events?
Well, I don't think people know about Haiti in this country. The fact that it wasn't a British colony makes it even more distant. Like, people are more aware of Jamaica and other Caribbean islands or history. But there's compassion fatigue. There's a limit to how much probably newsrooms feel they can cover. What is the big story? There are direct British interests, Scottish interests in Afghanistan. Scottish lives have been lost in Afghanistan. We don't have that connection with Haiti. Haiti is very much under the American sphere of influence. It's a country that geography, and I mean, it's been hit by hurricanes. I mean, the devastation on that island alone from natural environmental forces, before you take into account the political setup, it's a deeply corrupt system. And also, I mean, I don't like to people bandy about these words like imperial or in the domain, but it's under the American sphere of influence. Basically, it controls the Caribbean. And American policy towards Haiti over the generations. I mean, most listeners probably don't even realize that America actually occupied Haiti for about 15 years before the war as part of making sure that it was a sort of government that the US wanted to see operate there. And if you look about in the cholera, the people are really worried about the cholera breaking out in Haiti at the moment. Now, the country with the best healthcare in that part of the world outside of the US is the island of Cuba. And they are a country that has had a 60-year-old embargo against them from the United States, which basically says it all. So it's tragic and it's painful, but unfortunately, Afghanistan has more direct repercussions and connections to British history in the past decade, and even as a turning point, I've suggested in this last week.
Thanks, Simon. And Alison, one last thing it just occurred to me as we were talking there. It is certainly regarded as being the case that some of the issues and some of the challenges that arise in Afghanistan relate to governance, or a lack of governance, and relate to the style of governance, which might be accused of largely being corrupt. Now, I'm old enough to remember Alan Wicker going to Haiti to meet Baby Doc Duvalier, and then his son, who took power when Duvalier passed away. And I think certainly there were significant accusations of corruption in the Haitian regime at those times. So I'm not seeking to draw an equiparation between the two circumstances, but do you think there are perhaps lessons for the West, or lessons for us in Scotland as we look perhaps towards independence, about how important and the significant and the fundamental significance and importance of good governance and the prevention of corruption?
I think it is important, but I think it's about how you embed a kind of culture of scrutiny, a culture of questioning, a culture of independence of the media in many countries as well, without which that kind of corruption breeds and goes unpunished, and those who seek to benefit from it grow in power. I was just going to add just something about your point to Simon about the world having a limited attention span, and I would agree with that. And I think there's a couple of things. The ongoing situation in Yemen not getting any better. People there still suffering. Again, they're having flooding issues as well. And in Lebanon, they're about to run out of water because they're running out of power, and that is a real serious humanitarian disaster. And it's not on any of the front pages, the situation in Lebanon, but definitely one that we should be keeping an eye on as well, given the severity that situation could develop into.
Thanks, Alison. That's a very good point that you make. We'll leave matters overseas now and we'll return to Scotland for our next story, which relates to the second of the big political announcements that took place on Friday. We'll return and discuss the Butte House Agreement in a little while. But also on Friday, the First Minister appointed an Environment Council. As I understand it, the main purpose of the First Minister's new Environment Council is to advise the government on international best practice and to keep us at the forefront of tackling the climate emergency and ecological decline. And I think there are 14 members of this new Environment Council, which is chaired by Professor Sir Ian Boyd, who is the President-elect of the Royal Society of Biology and who is based at the University of St Andrews, and a number of other names, some of whom are well known, like Gordon Buchanan, the photographer, and Dame Ellen MacArthur, the sailor, and others from organisations around Scotland. So, Alison, I know that we've been told that this Council of 14 will is there to advise and to keep us at the forefront of tackling the climate emergency. But beyond advising, what do you think the Scottish Government will actually do?
I think it's important that all the relevant information, all the relevant action points, all the relevant things that we can do as a government to tackle climate change are brought to a body such as this, so that can be condensed and advice given to ministers. I think that's really important, because I think perhaps some people might look at climate change in a very narrow point of view and say it's maybe about reducing emissions in industry, or it's about more solar panels on roofs. In fact, it goes through right across all policies in all different areas. So having these voices who can reach out into those areas, bring the information back, and make sure that government gets presented with the ideas that are out there that will make the real difference in all these different areas. I think it's very important that we do that. That's an ongoing piece of work. And I know we might go on to talk about the agreement with the Greens later on, but I think accelerating this, when you've had the recent reports about climate change coming out in recent days, this needs to go faster, it needs to go further, and we need to try and make sure that we're doing actions right across the board to make that difference, to make that change.
Thanks, Alison, and that really is my point. Do you think it's the case that we will see the sort of change in the way in which Scottish Government departments make policy and implement policy? You think we will see that begin to change, or the pace accelerate, as you say? I'm interested in the way in which this new Environment Council is actually going to get traction. Is actually going to how the ideas and the advice coming from I won't do them the disservice of calling them the great and the good. They are clearly, the committee is extremely well qualified and draws on skills and expertise from around the world. But how do you think we can actually make sure that this council, their ideas and their input gets traction quickly and begins to change the making and implementation of Scottish Government policy?
I think by taking forward the recommendations that they bring, and you say, will government change? Government has to change. We all have to change, and it's not just up to government to do that. It's up to all of us in our lives. It's up to business. It's up to both public and private companies across Scotland to look at what they're doing, to decide if what they're doing can really be sustainable in the future, and make change right now. It's not something we can put off for 5-10 years. It's something that we have to look at the environmental impact and make those changes now, because we're going to run out of time to make these changes. And I think what the recent report and what COP26 coming up will highlight is that kind of that necessary action that we have to move now, and that Scotland, with this group of advisors, hopefully will recommend, how that can be done just faster and quicker, and not waiting for something else, to actually get things done right now. And I hope very much that those recommendations that they're going to make just now, they've talked about being a sounding board for near-term policy. That's kind of moving things right now, changing the things that we can change just now. Perhaps some things will take longer, but if we can reach those things that can be done quickly and soon and now, I think that's where they should be going with this.
Thanks, Alison. And Simon, turning to you now. Now, I'm trying hard not to be cynical here, and if I am being cynical, it is not because I don't. We all don't understand the importance of the issues here. You've mentioned already this afternoon the approach that younger people, younger citizens have, and their different perspective on the world than perhaps people who are as old and grey as I am. I'll not bracket you in that, Simon, and I'll certainly not bracket you in that, Alison, at all. But I'm not trying not to be cynical here, and it is because of the importance of these issues. Do you think that this announcement on Friday, coming at this time, is it timely PR? Is the imminent COP26 conference, is it now diverting all Scottish Government communications to have a green border around them for political purposes? Or do you think this is actually a change?
I mean, that's been a criticism of the SNP governments going back to 2007, that they're very keen on marketing and PR. And I myself have made that criticism. But saying that, no, I welcome this idea. I think government today has got to open up. Everything doesn't come through government and the civil service or through Parliament. And I think the Scottish government, a Holyrood or Bute House, wherever you want to station them, open up and bring in people from the outside, open up the discussion. And I think that has worked quite well with COVID, for instance. I'll give you an example, like Professor Devi Sridhar, who has come in and added something to the public debate and awareness, particularly in Scotland, about the whole COVID situation and how it has developed. And she was co-opted to a certain extent by the Scottish government and the guy over at St Andrews, excuse me, I've forgotten his name. But I think this is something that government should, I mean, all governments of all political parties have not been inclined to do this in the past, but I think they should do this a lot more so. Bring in experts. I mean, I see the names Gordon Buchanan and Ellen MacArthur, etc. To be quite honest, I haven't looked at the rest of the names on the list, but I'm more interested in what the scientists have to say. And I think the Scottish government shouldn't be afraid of using people who are not maybe totally in line in their policy or might even criticise previous government policies in this regard, but give them a forum. And it's really about educating the public, making the public aware, because the public might listen more and think, this isn't a party political axe that is being they're grinding here. It's educating you about how the importance of electric cars, the importance of wind and water energy, solar energy, all these aspects of how we have to change our lifestyles. These things are going ahead away, you know, regarding cars, etc. But it's waking people up to that fact and educating the public how you have to change your lifestyle. And people do that. They did it with smoking. They did it with car seat belts. The education of the public, and generally speaking, the public has reacted well to social distancing and abiding by lockdowns, etc., mask wearings. The great majority of people go along with this. The media gives a distorted view at times, you know, like anti-vaxxers, etc. They get more publicity than how much they actually are, how much they make up part of the population. So I think it's possibly something that should have been done earlier, but it's better late than never. And I think when you conjoin it with how the Scottish government has made this deal with the Green Party, I think that is quite positive. And I'm somebody who believes in progressive alliances. I think the rigidity of the political parties is changing. And I think you see that again. I'll point back to the younger generation, the people, they're more fluid, the way they switch between parties, etc. But you could see there is quite a strong green independence sector of the population, and I think that's expanding in general. So overall, I'd say it's something to be welcomed.
Thanks, Simon. You make a very good point there. I'm reflecting that notoriously during the Brexit referendum, we were told by English politicians that the public had had enough of experts. roll forward several years, and in the face of potentially the most significant domestic crisis since the Second World War, experts are put front and centre, and rightly, as you rightly say, the public both take to them and listen to them. A number, as you say, Debbie Street, Ireland, Abald, as two examples of professors who have come to the fore, and also, if I can call them this, government scientists and government advisors, be it Jason Leach, the Chief Medical Officer, and others in Scotland. Do you think, Simon, we're seeing a change here insofar as Alison was saying, that the population actually want to listen to experts and will embrace guidance from experts, especially on issues and circumstances which I think it's fair to say transcend party politics?
Yes, I think that is the case. I think that is developing at quite a rapid pace. I think politics is. I'm a great believer in progressive alliances, for instance, and what is interesting as well, just going off at a bit of a tangent here. Now, Labour in Scotland and Labour in the UK has reverted back to hardcore unionism, which I think is out of touch with a lot of Labour supporters. An awful lot of Labour supporters in Scotland have left. They've moved to the Greens and the SNP in particular. But you saw people like Thewliss, who was making some very good points about the Afghanistan last week. But under the Corbyn leadership, Corbyn and MacDonald, they were a lot more open to the idea of progressive alliances. And I think with our first past the post Westminster system, people of the liberal left, you name it, the non-Tory majority have got to get their act together. And, you know, I don't know if you've had Ian Blackford on this programme, but you could ask him. He got on better with the previous Labour leadership, which were more open to the idea of Scotland's right to have a referendum, etc. And the Labour Party's reaction to that is all quite desperate, really, and I think it is flawed. But that is where we're at this moment. You look at the SNP itself, it has got, Labour used to call itself the party of the broad church, but there's quite a wide range of views right across the spectrum in the SNP itself, and they're united by the idea of the independence for Scotland. But you're not going to get independence. It's not going to be achieved through the SNP or the SNP alone, as people realise that from 2014, and it is growing that progressive alliance and pointing out to people what that progressive alliance is all about. I would have been interested to see when Richard Leonard was leader of Labour, if the SNP had asked them, the Scottish government had made that same sort of extended that open hand that they have to the Greens, what the reaction would have been. And if Labour had knocked it aside, I think that would have hurt Labour more than it would have hurt the Scottish government. But maybe that is too pie in the sky and it's an anathema. Probably Alison is, spinning in her chair at me mentioning even the thought of it.
I hope she's not spinning too fast. We'd better move on to the next story this afternoon, and that is that on Wednesday, of course, the Government Expenditure and Revenue Scotland, the GERS numbers, the lies, damned lies, and guesstimates. It was the annual GERS day last Wednesday. And we are told by the Scottish Government's head of statistics that the financial position of the Scottish economy has deteriorated further. And then as night follows day, politicians who revel in that sort of news pass ill-informed comment. So Alison, turning to you first of all, what does the annual publication of these GERS numbers in this form actually achieve, do you think?
Well, I think it's become just another bit of sport, another bit of the kind of a thing that comes up every year in the political calendar, and everybody has their set opinions about it, regardless of what it actually says. If the figures are good, it shows the strength of the union. If the figures are good, it shows the potential strength of an independent Scotland. the same for if it's bad. So I think it's become something, honestly, that has become something that we don't even really need to bother about. We know what the lines are going to be. We know what everybody's going to say about it. And the reality is, it shows you the situation of Scotland currently within the Union. It doesn't tell you terribly much more than that. And it doesn't tell you about the potential of Scotland as a nation if we were independent, about the things that we might do differently, about the things that we would do if we had the full entirety of the economy within our hands to deal with. So I think, as I say, it's become a bit of knockabout every single year. I think it tells us less and less of relevance, actually, to anybody. And I think that is perhaps reflected a wee bit more in some of the kind of press coverage of it, because I felt it was every year it's getting a wee bit less because of the importance of it and the significance of it. I feel that people are just kind of fed up with it as an argument, almost. Those that are suspicious of the statistics will remain suspicious of the statistics. Those that have something to prove will claim that it does or that it doesn't. And I think we just need to think more about what actually we can do at the moment to influence the economy that we have, and what more we could do with independence should we have those full powers.
Thanks, Alison. And Simon, why do you think the Scottish Government persists with what might have been, maybe less so now, on Alison's argument, but what certainly struck me is what's become an annual festival of guesstimation and self-flagellation? Why does the Scottish Government persist with this?
Well, it gives the civil service something to do, to come up with these figures. But I wouldn't dismiss it as much as Alison does, because I think it just feeds into Scotland's the too wee, too poor idea of Scotland being an independent country. And in 2014, it was on the economy and this uncertainty about, I think people, particularly pensioners, how would our pensions be paid, etc. And I think that had quite an impact. Now, in these uncertain times and how the economy is going to react under Brexit and post-COVID, that is not the best of territory to be holding a referendum when you've got to win over these people who might consider it but sort of think, is it too risky a leap? And I've always thought the SNP has been pretty poor at knocking or taking Gers to pieces. In fact, one of the best critiques of Gers comes from Richard Murphy, the accountant and economist. I saw he had a piece in the National the other day. But and again in 2014, in the white paper that the Scottish Government produced, it was really thin on the economy. And I think if you're looking forward towards people are speculating independence referendum in 2023, the Scottish Government really has to get its act together, or the SNP, the independence movement, in really knocking this argument down. And people have got to look back. Ian Lang came up with it. There was a leaked email. It was done to undermine the other parties. But the Tories will use this time and again to attack the notion of independence by saying, the Scots, it's subsidies, we subsidise you, Westminster subsidises you, you need that subsidy. And Labour is attack is look at the black hole, how will we fill it? Will it be more, far higher taxes, cuts in public spending? And I think going towards the next independence referendum, people in the independence movement have got to get be far stronger when it comes to the economy and finance, and be able to take the Gers argument apart and expose, its estimates. There's so many aspects of this that it gets presented, it goes out on a BBC, goes out right across in the Tory press, that it's used to batter the notion of independence on the head. And I think it does have an effect.
Thanks, Simon. That's absolutely right. So, Alison, finally on this point, we've been talking a little bit about openness and transparency in government and governance around the world. So, in terms of moving this forward and moving the understanding of Scotland's economy as it currently is, moving that on. Do you think that the annual Gers Festival and the Gers reporting should just be allowed to wither and die, or might it be refreshed and provide more analysis in terms of identifying very clearly what in the numbers are estimates and what are guesstimates, what we do actually know and what we do not actually know, and why we don't know it. Do you think that would be a step forward?
I think, I'm always in favour of more clarity around figures and statistics and what things actually mean. So I have no problem with figures being published. It's transparency, it's openness. The government should be clear on what that is, but they should also be clear on what it means. And I think it's been quite interesting from Westminster looking at the Office of Budget Responsibility reports that come out at the same time as the UK government's budget. And they do some analysis of where the economy's going, where growth is, what might happen. And while it's not perfect, and it's pretty dense in terms of the detail, it is quite an interesting exercise. But I think we need to think, what are the important things that we're measuring here? What do they actually mean to the person standing at Glasgow Cross? What does this the activities and the influence of the Scottish Government and the UK Government and the global economy on what our economy is doing as well? And what can we actually control, what remains within our hands, and what are the things that we need to have full control over, and before we can actually see a meaningful difference in our economy. Because to me, while you still have the majority of taxation of coming through the UK revenues rather than through Scotland, our ability to influence that taxation, to change tax loopholes, to make sure that we're getting the money in that we should be, and the cooperation internationally to try and reduce tax avoidance and tax evasion. All of these things are not currently in our hands, and I think that is not something that the GERS figures reflect. They reflect the situation as we are just now. They don't reflect the possibilities of an independent Scotland.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alison. We'll move on now, and the other big political story on Friday, of course, was the announcement by the First Minister and Patrick Harvie and Lorna Slater of a cooperation agreement, or a draft cooperation agreement, between the Scottish Government and the Scottish Green Party parliamentary group, which is being described as the Bute House Agreement. Now, the agreement, as we know, it is a commitment to work together to provide effective and responsible leadership for Scotland for this session of the Scottish Parliament in the interests of Scotland, of the people who live in Scotland, and of future generations. And the cornerstone of this agreement and of delivering effective and responsible leadership over this Parliament is mutual trust and good faith. Not necessarily language that I would necessarily have used in the context of talking about politics. No disrespect to politicians. But I think, and also we should bear in mind, and for clarity, well, I'm not going to dwell on it, but there are exclusions from the Bute House Agreement, which cover a number of things, which perhaps will get attention in the press because they may show the areas where there is disagreement and where there may be friction going forward. But if we'll focus on the positive and focus on what's being creative, I think it's clear that that all of the introductions from the First Minister and from Patrick Harvie and from Lorna Slater were focusing very much on what Simon calls progressive alliances, on a new type of politics in Scotland. So, Simon, I'll come to you first. Do you think this will lead to a new type of politics in Scotland?
I think it's formalising a relationship that had existed and has developed, which is quite, you could say it's quite positive then if you're thinking about progressive alliances, because, I mean, the Greens have been effectively backing and supporting the SNP and its budgets in recent years. And again, once the overall majority was lost. And it gives it, and it is an important, I think, strategic point because it gives Holyrood the majority for when it comes to the idea of another independence referendum. It's also, I think, smart politics by Nicola Sturgeon, greening her government, firming up support among, let's say, under 40s, under 50s, where it is strong, where the majority is already. And the idea as well that it will make the government a more dominant force overall, because I do not really see Labour making any particular moves forward in the coming years. and the Tories neither. The Tories, the Ruth Davidson era is over with the Johnson government. So it places the Scottish government in quite a strong position. And I think overall, if you're in favour of progressive politics like myself, and you've got a green tinge to you, apart from being a Hibs supporter, you'd welcome this.
Thanks, Simon. And Alison, turning to you, do you think does Scotland need a new sort of politics?
I mean, I think it's been clear for a while that there is a kind of political bubble bit, and then there's how the rest of the population think. And it was really interesting chapping doors in Glasgow during the election campaign earlier this year, and the kind of tribal rivalries that perhaps politicians have are not the tribal rivalries that lots of voters have. And it was not uncommon to see around the streets of my constituency in the part as well that I share with Nicola Sturgeon, people who had a Green poster and an SNP poster next to one another on the windows. So for the parties to work together, it seems entirely logical to me. There's a lot of the agenda that we have that we share, hence being able to put together this policy programme. And I think, as we were talking about earlier, in this year of COP26, that environmental agenda and how we tackle the climate crisis together, it requires that cross-party agreement. It requires concerted action across politics. I think it makes an awful lot of sense to do this, and I'm very, very glad that I'm on the SNP NEC. I can't tell you anything more about what happened, as you'll understand, but I'm very glad and very enthusiastic that we had a unanimous agreement of this proposal yesterday.
Thanks, Alison. And Simon, thinking a wee bit more broadly for a moment, it struck me thinking about this yesterday that in the event that the cooperation agreement comes into force, and in the event that the cooperation agreement sticks and remains in force for the duration of this Scottish Parliament, and those are two big ifs, but proceeding on those two bases, it strikes me that this means that Scotland will have locked out right-wing politics for all of the 21st century, effectively, and it indicates that right-wing politics will continue to be locked out. I think this might indicate that Scotland is one of the few countries in Europe where there have been no right-wing administrations, and there's no prospect of a right-wing administration for the foreseeable future. Simon, do you think that says that there's something different about Scottish politics, or is it simply, or is there something else at play here?
No, I think there is something different about Scotland. I mean, every country has its unique political setup. What struck me in 2014 is the amount of English people, both English journalists coming up to Scotland and English people who lived in Scotland who were going down to visit relatives and friends, said to me how they felt that there was a definite divergence. Both countries, there was a definite different political culture in Scotland. But saying that, if you didn't have the first past the post system at Westminster, this is something when I was in the Labour Party, I remember going way back 30 years, I supported PR, which people totally dismissed. I was always a big fan of constitutional reform. The party really has totally ignored that. But there is actually a progressive majority in the UK. I mean, you look back over British general elections, but because of our system. Now, this is the main reason I moved towards supporting independence. I think the Westminster system is not fit for purpose. I think it is time. I think it would benefit England as well if Scotland became an independent country, Ireland became a united country, and I think overall, and the natural relations between the states would be really positive. But that ship has sailed, I think, for unionist politics. You know, the constitutional monarchy does not serve the people well. And a big change in our politics, and I think Alison might agree with this, is that so many of the divisions are generational rather than regards class as it used to be in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up in politics. And you saw that with Brexit, you saw that with Scottish independence, and you see it on so many different aspects of politics today. And that is a direction it's moving in. And the UK state is not fit for purpose, full stop.
Thanks, Simon. And reflecting briefly, looking at the time, but reflecting briefly on an important part of the draft cooperation agreement, there is a commitment to hold a referendum on Scottish independence within the Scottish Parliament, so that's the next 5 years, and preferably by the end of 2023. So, Simon, to you first. If we've seen and heard commitments to independence, to a second independence referendum before, do you think this commitment set out in the Butte House Agreement, do you think this is something new?
Is it new? I don't know. I think it's a better question for Alison for me. Could I just make one quick point? I think it was Alison, it was your constituency where the people came out and demonstrated against the Home Office raid. Yeah. Just I'd like to mention that regarding a different political culture. I don't think you would get. I think Scotland's attitude to immigration and to outsiders is different because the right-wing media, the Tory press, and the Tory party that throws petrol on the flames of that in England, we do not have that in Scotland, and that is a strong basis to, develop a more progressive society in this country. And I wonder how many other countries in Europe would have got such a crowd materialising on the streets in defence of immigrants. I don't know, Alison, do you think there's many other places that would have happened?
I don't know, and certainly Pollokshields is a very special place, and people are very keen to support their neighbours, and it's been a part of the city that has had migration over many, many years, and people are used to that. But I was on a call. I was supposed to be when the protest happened. I was supposed to be on the Treasury Select Committee, and I had to give my apologies to that meeting. And I said, "Oh, things happened in my constituency. You'll see it in the news, blah blah blah." And I would be really surprised if any other MP on that committee would have had that kind of demonstration in their constituencies, or would have been down there amongst the campaign trying to help and support their constituents. And that's just because it does feel to me like a very different political culture. Not to say that people aren't welcoming in other parts of the UK, because I think that would be a really unfair characterisation, but I think people here have a very different attitude, and that's been born of our history of sending people out into the world from Scotland, that we want to make people as welcome when they come here.
Thank you, Alison. I'd asked you the question first, Simon, because I wanted Alison to have the last word this afternoon. So we've achieved that, which is the main thing. So thank you. I think in those circumstances, I think that I hope that everybody has enjoyed their full Scottish this afternoon. It's useful. I think it's relevant to. We were thinking about the distinct political culture in Pollokshields, the distinct political culture in Scotland, perhaps. And in making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland, and you will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the cameras or in front of the cameras, or in any other way which helps to promote the work of the station, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be back tomorrow at 7 o'clock with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. Meantime, that's the way it is today in Scotland on Sunday the 22nd of August. Thank you for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. As I said on Friday's programme, remember, we are all the Glasgow girls, and I hope that you have a very peaceful remainder of your weekend.